Hello, my darling dearests, my lovelies. Hello. So, we are on chapter 15 of House of Many Ways. We're going to see if we can't finish it tonight, if Opal does not have too many objections. And tomorrow, I will be giving her arthritis injections, all on my own. So, let's hope that goes well. Timmins, rather grudgingly, took Charmaine the long, confusing way back to the kobold's cave. There, he said cheerfully. You'll know the way from here, and disappeared inside the cave, leaving Charmaine alone with Waif. But Charmaine did not know the way from here. She stood beside the object that Timmins had called a sled chair for several minutes, wondering what to do and watching kobolds painting and carving and upholstering the object and never sparing Charmaine a glance. At length it occurred to her to put Waif down on the ground. Show me the way to Great Uncle William's house, Waif. Be clever. Waif trotted off with a will, but Charmaine soon began to seriously doubt that Waif was being clever. Waif trotted, and Charmaine walked, and they turned left and then right again for what seemed like hours. Charmaine was so busy thinking about what she'd discovered that, several times, she missed the moment when Waif turned left or right and had to wait, standing in the near dark, shouting, Waif! Waif! Until Waif came back and found her. Like a good puppy. Quite probably, Charmaine doubled the distance like this. Waif began toiling and panting, with her tongue hanging out longer and longer, but Charmaine did not dare pick her up in case they never got home at all. She talked to Waif instead, to encourage them both. Waif, I must tell Sophie what has happened. She must be worrying about Calcifer by now, and I must tell the king about the money, too. But if I go to the royal mansion as soon as I get home, horrible Prince Ludovic will be there, pretending to like crumpets. Why doesn't he like them? Crumpets are nice. It's because he's a Lubbocken, I suppose. I don't dare tell the king in front of him. We'll have to wait to go until tomorrow, I think. When do you think Prince Ludovic means to leave? Tonight? The king did tell me to come back in 2 days, so Ludovic should be gone by then. If I get there early, I can speak to Sophie first. Oh dear, I just remembered. Calcifer said that they were going to pretend to leave, so we may not find Sophie there. Oh, Waif, I wish I knew what to do. The more Charmaine talked about it, the less she knew what to do. In the end, she was too tired to talk and just stumbled after the pale shape of the limping, panting Waif, pattering along in front of her, until at long last Waif barged a door open and they were in Great Uncle William's living room, where Waif gave a moan and fell over on her side, breathing in hundreds of quick little gasping breaths. Charmaine stared out the windows at the hydrangeas, all pink and purple in sunset light. We've been all day, she thought. No wonder Waif's so tired. No wonder my feet hurt. At least Peter should be home by now, and I do hope he's got supper ready. Peter! She shouted. When there was no answer, Charmaine picked Waif up and went into the kitchen. Waif feebly licked at Charmaine's hand in gratitude for not having to walk a step farther. Here the sunset light was falling on zigzags of pink and white washing, still hanging gently flapping in the yard outside. There was no sign of Peter. Peter! Charmaine called, but there was no answer. Charmaine sighed. Evidently Peter had gotten thoroughly lost, even worse than she had. And there was no knowing when he would turn up now. Too many pieces of colored string, Charmaine muttered to Waif as she tapped the fireplace for dog food. Stupid boy. She felt far too tired to do any cooking. When Waif had eaten 2 dishes of food and drunk the water Charmaine fetched from the bathroom, Charmaine staggered into the living room and had afternoon tea. After some thought, she had afternoon tea a second time. Then she had morning coffee. Then she wondered whether to go to the kitchen and have breakfast, but found she was too tired and picked up a book instead. A long time later, Waif woke her up by climbing on the sofa beside her. Oh, bother this, Charmaine said. She went to bed without even trying to wash and fell asleep with her glasses still on her nose, which is dangerous. When she woke up the next morning, she could hear that Peter was back. There were bathroom noises and footsteps and the sound of doors opening and shutting. He sounds awfully brisk, Charmaine thought. I wish I did, but she knew that she really had to get to the royal mansion today. So she groaned and she got up. She dug out her last set of clean clothes and took such great care washing and doing her hair that Waif arrived anxiously from somewhere to fetch her. Yes, breakfast. All right, I know, Charmaine said. The trouble is, she admitted as she picked Waif up, I'm scared of that colorless gentleman. I think he's even worse than the prince. She shoved the door open with one foot, turned left into the kitchen, where she stopped and stared. A strange woman was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly eating breakfast. She was the kind of woman who, you know at once, is completely efficient. She had efficiency all over her narrow, sun-weathered face, and competence all over her strong, narrow hands. Those hands were busy efficiently cutting up a mighty pile of pancakes and syrup, and slicing the stack of crispy bacon beside it. Charmaine stared both at the pancakes and the woman's gypsy-like clothes. She wore bright, faded flounces all over and colorful scarf across her faded, fairish hair. The woman turned and stared back. Who are you? They both said at once. The woman with her mouth full. Who are you? I'm Charmaine Baker, Charmaine said. I'm here to look after Great Uncle William's house while he's away being cured by the elves. The woman swallowed her mouthful. Good, she said. I'm glad to see he left someone in charge. I didn't like to think of the dog being left all alone with Peter. She's been fed, by the way. Peter's not a dog person. Is Peter still asleep? Said Charmaine. I'm not sure. He didn't come home last night. Opal, you are being very noisy and very inconsiderate. Honk, she said, and go back to eating paper. I love you. I love this dog so much. The woman sighed. He always vanishes as soon as I turn my back, she said. I know he must have gotten here safely. She waved a fork loaded with pancake and bacon at the window. That washing out there has Peter all over it. Charmaine felt her face go hot and red. Some of it was my fault, she admitted. I boiled a robe. Why do you think it was Peter? Because, said the woman, he has never been able to get a spell right in his life. I should know. I'm his mother. Charmaine was rather shaken to realize that she was talking to the witch of Montalbino. She was impressed. Of course Peter's mother is hyper-efficient, she thought. But what is she doing here? I thought you'd gone to Ingray, she said. I had, said the witch. I got as far as Strangia when Queen Beatrice told me that Wizard Howl had gone to High Norland. So back I came across the mountains and dropped in on the elves where they told me that Wizard Norland was with them. I was extremely alarmed then because I realized that Peter was probably all alone here. I'd sent him here to be safe, you see. I came here at once. Well, I think Peter was safe, Charmaine said. Or he was until he got lost yesterday. Oh, he'll be safe now that I'm here, the witch said. I can feel he's somewhere quite near. She sighed. I suppose I'll have to go and look for him. He doesn't know his right hand from his left, you see. I know, Charmaine said. He uses colored string. He's quite efficient, really. But she thought as she spoke that to someone as super efficient as the witch of Montalbino, Peter was bound to seem as hopeless as Peter thought Charmaine herself was. Parents, she thought. She put Waif on the floor and asked politely, Excuse me for asking, but how did you get the breakfast spell to send you those pancakes? By giving it the right order, of course, said the witch. Do you want some? Charmaine nodded. The witch flicked efficient fingers towards the fireplace. Breakfast, she commanded, with pancakes, bacon, juice, and coffee. The loaded tray appeared at once with a most satisfactory heap of pancakes, trickling with syrup in the center of it. See? Said the witch. Oh, thank you, Charmaine said, gratefully taking hold of the tray. Waif's nose tilted up at the smell, and she ran around in little circles, squeaking. It was clear that, to Waif, being fed by the witch did not count as a proper breakfast. Charmaine put the tray on the table and gave Waif the crunchiest piece of bacon, like a good mom. That's an enchanting dog you've got there, the witch remarked, going back to her own breakfast. She's rather sweet, Charmaine admitted as she sat down and began to enjoy the pancakes. No, I didn't mean that, the witch said impatiently. I never gush. I meant that is what she is, an enchanting dog. She ate more pancake and added with her mouth full, "Enchanting dogs are quite very magical. This one is doing you a great honor by adopting you as her human. I'm guessing that she even changed her sex to match yours. I hope you appreciate her as you should." "Yes," said Charmaine. "I do. And I'd almost rather have breakfast with Princess Hilda," she thought. Why does she have to be so severe? She went on with her breakfast, remembering that Great Uncle William had seemed to think that Waif was a male dog. Waif had seemed to be a male dog at first. Then Peter had picked her up, and she was female. "I'm sure you're right," Charmaine added politely. "Why is Peter not safe here on his own? He's my age, and I am." Dog. "I imagine," the witch said dryly, "that your magic works rather better than Peter's." She finished her pancakes and went on to toast. "If Peter can possibly bungle a spell, he will," she asserted, buttering the toast. "Don't tell me," she said, taking a large crunchy bite, "because I won't believe you, that your magic doesn't do exactly what you mean it to, however you do it." Charmaine thought of the flying spell and the plumbing spell, and then of Rollo in the bag, and said, "Yes, I suppose." "Whereas," the witch interrupted, "Peter is just the opposite. His method is always perfect, but the spell always misfires. One of my reasons for sending him to Wizard Norland was that I hoped that the wizard could improve Peter's magic. William Norland owns the Book of Palimpsest, you see." Charmaine felt her face hotting up again. She said, passing Waif half a pancake. "What does the Book of Palimpsest do, then?" "That dog will be too fat to walk if you go on feeding her like that," said the witch. "Like a typical terrible woman. Cruel. The Book of Palimpsest gives a person the freedom to use all the magics of earth, air, fire, and water. It only gives fire if the person is trustworthy. And of course, the person has to have magical ability in the first place." Her severe face showed just a trace of anxiety. "I think Peter has the ability," Charmaine thought. "Fire. I put the fire out on Peter. Am I trustworthy then?" "He must have the ability," she told the witch. "You can't make a spell go wrong if you can't do magic in the first place. What other reasons made you send Peter here?" "Enemies," said the witch, somberly sipping her coffee. "I have enemies. They killed Peter's father, you know." "You mean Lubbocks?" Charmaine asked. She put everything back on her tray and took the last swig of coffee, preparing to get up and go. "There is," said the witch, "only one Lubbock so far as I know. It seems to have killed all its rivals, but yes, it was the Lubbock that started the avalanche. I saw it." "Oh, then you can stop worrying," Charmaine said, standing up. "The Lubbock's dead. Calcifer destroyed it the day before yesterday." The witch was astonished. "Tell me!" she said eagerly. Although she was itching to be off to the royal mansion, Charmaine found that she had to sit down, pour herself another cup of coffee, and tell the witch the whole story, not only about the Lubbock and the Lubbock eggs, but also about Rollo and the Lubbock. And this is unfair use of witchcraft, she thought, as she found herself telling the witch how Calcifer seemed to be missing. "Then what are you doing sitting about here for?" the witch said. "Run along to the royal mansion and tell Sophie at once. The poor woman must be out of her mind with worry by now. Hurry it up, girl!" "And not even thank you for telling me," Charmaine thought sourly. "I'd rather have my mother than Peter's any day, and I'd definitely rather have breakfast with Princess Hilda." She got up and said a polite goodbye, then, with Waif racing at her heels, she rushed through the living room and down the garden into the road. Lucky I didn't tell her about the conference room way, she thought, pounding along with her glasses bouncing on her chest, or she'd make me go that way and I'd never have the chance to look for Calcifer. Just before the road bent, she came to the place where Calcifer had exploded the Lubbock eggs. A huge lump of the cliff had fallen off there, sending a hill of boulders almost as far as the road. Several people who looked like shepherds were climbing about on the pile, searching for buried sheep, and scratching their heads as if they were wondering what had caused the damage. Charmaine hesitated. If Calcifer was to be found, those people would have found it by now. She dropped to a walk and stared at the heap of broken stone carefully as she passed. There did not seem to be any trace of blue among the rocks, nor sign of flame anywhere. She made up her mind to have a thorough search later, and broke into a run again, hardly noticing that the sky was a clear blue and there was a gauzy blue haze over the mountains. It was going to be one of High Norland's rare scorching days. The only way this affected Charmaine was that Waif soon began to look seriously overheated, panting, rolling from side to side as she ran, and hanging her pink tongue out so far that it almost brushed the road. "Oh, you! I suppose it was that pancake," Charmaine said, snatching her up and pounding onwards. "I wish the witch had not said that about you," she confessed as she ran. "It makes me worried about liking you so much." By the time she reached the town, Charmaine was as hot as Waif, so hot that she almost wished she had a tongue to hang out like Waif's did. She had to drop to a brisk walk, and even though she took the shortest way, it still seemed to take forever to reach the royal square. At last she swung round the corner into the square and found her way blocked by a staring crowd. Half the citizens of High Norland seemed to be gathered there to stare at the new building standing a few feet away from the royal mansion. It was almost as tall as the mansion itself, long and dark and coaly looking, and it had a turret on each corner. It was the castle that Charmaine had last seen floating vaguely and sadly away across the mountains. She stared at it in as much amazement as everyone else in the square. "How did it get here?" people were asking one another as Charmaine tried to push her way towards it. "However did it fit?" Charmaine looked at the 4 roads that led into the royal square and wondered the same thing. None of the roads was more than half as wide as the castle was, but there it sat, solid and tall, as if it had built itself into the square overnight. Charmaine elbowed her way towards it with growing curiosity. As she came close under its walls, a blue fire leapt from one of the turrets and plunged towards her. Charmaine ducked. Waif wriggled. Rafe. Someone screamed. Everyone in the crowd backed away in a hurry and left Charmaine standing there on her own, facing a blue teardrop of flame hovering just level with her face. Waif's frayed tail pounded on Charmaine's arm, wagging a greeting. "If you're going into the mansion," Calcifer crackled at them, "tell them to hurry it up. I can't keep the castle here all morning." Charmaine was almost too delighted to speak. "I thought you were dead," she managed to say. "What happened?" Calcifer bobbed in the air and seemed a trifle ashamed. "I must have knocked myself silly," he confessed. "I was under a heap of rocks somehow. It took me all of yesterday to worm my way out. When I did get out, I had to find the castle. It had gone drifting off for miles. I've only just got here, really. Tell Sophie she was supposed to be pretending to leave today, and tell her I'm almost out of logs to burn. That should fetch her." "I will," Charmaine promised. "Are you sure you're all right?" "Just hungry," Calcifer said. "Logs, remember." "Logs," Charmaine agreed, and went up the steps to the mansion door, feeling suddenly that life was very much better and happier and freer than it had seemed before. Sim opened the great door to her surprisingly quickly. He looked out at the castle and the staring crowd and shook his head. "Ah, Miss Charming," he said. "This is surely becoming a rather difficult morning. I'm not sure that His Majesty is quite ready to begin work in the library yet, but do please come inside." "Thanks," Charmaine said, putting Waif down on the floor. "I don't mind waiting. I have to speak to Sophie first anyway." "Sophie, Mrs. Pendragon, that is to say," Sim said as he heaved the door shut. "Seems to be some of the difficulty this morning. The princess is highly put out But come this way, and you will see what I mean." He shuffled away down the damp corridor, beckoning Charmaine to follow. Before they even got to the corner to the place where the stone stairs came down, Charmaine could hear the voice of Jamal the cook saying, "And how is a person to know what to cook when the guests are always leaving and not leaving and then leaving again, I ask you?" This was followed by fruity growls from Jamal's dog and quite a chorus of other voices. Sophie was standing in the space below the stairs, holding Morgan in her arms, with Twinkle clinging anxiously and angelically to her skirt, while the fat nursemaid stood by, looking useless as usual. Princess Hilda stood by the stairs, more intensely royal and polite than Charmaine had ever seen her. And the king was there too, red in the face and obviously in a right royal rage. One look at all of their faces and Charmaine knew that there was no point in mentioning the logs here yet. Prince Ludovic was leaning on the end of the banisters, looking amused and superior. His lady was beside him, looking disdainful, in what was very nearly a ball dress, and, to Charmaine's dismay, the colourless gentleman was there too, respectfully beside the prince. You wouldn't think he'd just been robbing the king of all his money, the beast, Charmaine thought. "I call this an utter abuse of my daughter's hospitality," the king was saying. "You had no right to make promises you didn't intend to keep. If you were one of our subjects, we would forbid you to leave." Sophie said, trying to sound dignified. I do mean to keep my promise, sire, but you can't expect me to stay when my child has been threatened. If you'll let me take him away to safety first, then I'll be free to do whatever Princess Hilda wants. Charmaine saw Sophie's problem, with Prince Ludovic and the colorless gentleman standing there. She dared not say that she was only pretending to leave, and she did have to keep Morgan safe somehow. The king said angrily, "Don't give us any more false promises, young woman!" By Charmaine's feet, Waif suddenly began growling. Behind the king, Prince Ludovic laughed and clicked his fingers. What followed took everyone by surprise. The nursemaid and the prince's young lady both burst out of their dresses. The nursemaid became a burly purple person, with glistening muscles and bare-clawed feet. The prince's lady's ball dress peeled away to show a thick mauve body and a black leotard that had holes cut in the back to make room for a pair of useless-looking small purple wings. Both Lubbokin advanced on Sophie with big purple hands outstretched. Sophie yelled something and whirled Morgan away from the clutching hands. Morgan yelled too in surprise and terror. Everything else was drowned out by the high yapping of Waif and immense fruity growls from Jamal's dog as it charged after the prince's lady. Before the dog could get near either Lubbokin, the prince's lady, little wings whirring, had dived on Twinkle and snatched him up. Twinkle screamed and flailed blue velvet legs. The nursemaid Lubbokin put herself in front of Sophie to stop her trying to rescue Twinkle. "You see," Prince Ludovic said, "you are leaving, or your child suffers." Chapter 16, which is full of escapes and discoveries. "This," said Princess Hilda, "is an outrage." She had gotten this far when Twinkle somehow got away. He twisted out of the Lubbokin's purple arms and went racing away up the stairs, shrieking, "Help! Help! Don't let them touch me!" Both Lubbokin pushed Princess Hilda aside and charged upstairs after Twinkle. Princess Hilda reeled into the banisters and clung there, red in the face and suddenly far from stately. Charmaine found herself racing up after the Lubbokin, shouting, "Leave him alone! How dare you!" Afterwards, she thought it was the sight of Princess Hilda looking like an ordinary person that did it. Down below, Sophie hovered a second and then shoved Morgan into the arms of the king. "Keep him safe!" she gasped at the king. Then she hauled her skirts up and raced upstairs after Charmaine, shouting, "You just stop that, do you hear?" Jamal loyally labored up after them, yelling, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" and panting hugely. Behind him clambered his dog, as loyal as its master, uttering huge, rasping growls, while Waif ran backwards and forwards at the bottom of the stairs, making a soprano thunderstorm of barking. Prince Ludovic hung over the banisters opposite Princess Hilda and laughed at the lot of them. The two Lubbokin caught Twinkle near the top of the flight, in a blur of uselessly fanning wings and shiny mauve muscles. Twinkle surged and kicked mightily. For a moment his blue velvet legs seemed to be big, strong, man-sized legs. One big leg landed hard on the nursemaid Lubbokin's stomach. The other came down on the stairs and braced him, while Twinkle's right fist landed on the second Lubbokin's nose with a heavy, meaty, man-sized smack, leaving both Lubbokin in a heap on the landing. Twinkle sped nimbly on upwards. Charmaine saw him look earnestly backwards and down as he whirled on to the next flight of stairs, making sure that she and Sophie and Jamal were still following. They followed because the two Lubbokin picked themselves up with incredible speed and pelted up after Twinkle. Charmaine and Sophie pelted upstairs too, and Jamal and the dog toiled on behind. Halfway up the next flight, the Lubbokin caught Twinkle again. Again there were hefty smacking sounds, and Twinkle got loose once more, and once more sped upward into the third flight of stairs. He made it most of the way to the top of those before the Lubbokin reached him and threw themselves on top of him. "You are ridiculous." She is eating the box that her milk bones came in, because she craves fiber. All three went down into a walloping, writhing heap of legs, arms, and fluttering purple wings. By this time, Charmaine and Sophie were flagging and nearly out of breath. Charmaine distinctly saw Twinkle's angelic face emerge from the tangle of bodies and watched them carefully. When Charmaine had toiled across the landing and started on that flight, followed by Sophie, who was clutching a stitch in her side, the bundle of bodies suddenly exploded apart. The purple bodies rolled aside and Twinkle, loose again, went fleeting up the final flight of wooden stairs. By the time the Lubbokin had picked themselves up and started after him, Charmaine and Sophie were not far behind. Jamal and his dog were a long way in the rear. Up the wooden stairs they clattered, all the front five. Twinkle was climbing quite slowly now. Charmaine was fairly sure that this was artistic. But the Lubbokin gave shouts of triumph and put on speed. "Oh no, not again!" Sophie growled as Twinkle opened the door at the top and shot out onto the roof. The Lubbokin shot out after him. When Charmaine and Sophie toiled their way up there and stared out through the open door while they tried to get their breaths back, they saw the two Lubbokins sitting astride the golden roof. They were about halfway along and looking very much as if they wished to be anywhere else. There was no sign of Twinkle. "Now what is he up to?" Sophie said. Almost as she said it, Twinkle appeared in the doorway, flushed and laughing angelic laughter, with his golden curls and in a wind-blown halo. "Come and see what I found," he said gleefully. "Just follow me." Sophie clutched her side and pointed out at the roof. "What about those two?" she panted. "Do we just hope they fall off?" Twinkle grinned enchantingly. "Wait and see." He cocked his golden head, listening. Down below, the growling and scrabbling of the cook's dog was getting louder. It had overtaken its master and was now snarling and clattering its way up the wooden stairs, panting horribly. Twinkle nodded and turned towards the roof. He made a small gesture and muttered a word, and the two Lubbokin perched out there suddenly shrank with an unpleasant squelching sound and became two purplish, small, flopping things, wagging about on the ridge of the golden roof. "What?" said Charmaine. Twinkle's grin grew, if possible, even more angelic. "Squid," he said blissfully. "The cook's dog will sell its soul for squid." Sophie said, "Oh, squid. Yeah, I get you." The cook's dog arrived as she spoke, with its legs going like pistons and drool hanging from its gnarly jaws. It shot out of the door and along the roof like a brown streak. Halfway along, its jaws went snap crunch, and then snap crunch again, and the squids were gone. Only then did the dog seem to notice where it was. It froze with two legs on one side of the roof and two legs stiffly on the other, and whined piteously. "Oh, you poor thing," Charmaine said. "The cook will rescue it," Twinkle said. "You two follow me closely. You have to turn left through this door before your foot touches the roof." He stepped through the door leftward and vanished. Oh, I understand, Charmaine thought. This was like the doors in Great Uncle William's house, except that it is unnervingly high up. She let Sophie step through first, so that she could catch hold of Sophie's skirt if Sophie went wrong. But Sophie was more used to magic than Charmaine. She stepped left and vanished with no trouble at all. No trouble at all. Charmaine had a distinctly wobbly moment before she dared to follow her. She shut her eyes and stepped, but her eyes shot open of their own accord as she went, and she had a sideways sliding view of the golden roof giddily blazing past her before she could decide to scream "Elf!" to invoke the flying spell. No, before she could decide to scream "Elf!" to invoke the flying spell, she was elsewhere in a warm triangular space with rafters in the roof. Sophie said a bad word. In the dim light, she had stubbed her toe on one of the many dusty bricks piled throughout the place. "Naughty, naughty," Twinkle said. "Oh, shut up," Sophie said, standing on one leg to hold her toe. "Why don't you grow up?" "Not yet, I told you," Twinkle said. "We still have Prince Ludovic to deceive." "Ah, look! This happened when I was here just now, too." A golden light was spreading over the largest pile of bricks. The bricks picked up the light and glowed golden as well under the dust. Charmaine realized that they were not bricks at all, but ingots of solid gold. To make this quite clear, the golden banner appeared. Floating in front of the ingots, old-fashioned letters on it said, "Praise the wizard Mellicott, who hid the king his gold. The kingy his gold." "Ha!" Sophie snorted, letting go of her toe. "Mellicott must have lisped just like you. Proper soulmates you and he would have been. Same size and swelled heads. He couldn't resist having his name up in lights, could he?" "I don't need my name up in lights," Twinkle said, with great dignity. Said Sophie. "Where are we?" Charmaine asked quickly, because it rather looked as if Sophie was going to pick up a golden brick and brain Twinkle with it. "Is this the royal treasury?" "No," Under the golden roof, Twinkle told her. Cunning, isn't it? Everyone knows that the roof isn't really gold, so nobody thinks about looking for the gold here. He tipped up one golden brick, thumped it on the floor to knock the dust off, and dumped it into Charmaine's hands. It was so heavy that she nearly dropped it. You carry the evidence, he said. I think the king is going to be very glad to see this. Sophie, who seemed to have recovered her temper a little, said, That lisp is driving me crazy. I think I hate it even more than I hate those golden curls. But think how youthful, Twinkle said. Nasty Ludovic tried to kidnap me and forgot all about Morgan. He turned his big blue eyes soulfully up at Charmaine. I had a miserable childhood. Nobody loved me. I think I have the right to try again. Looking prettier, don't you? Don't listen to him, Sophie said. It's all a pose. How do we get out of here? I left Morgan with the king, and Ludovic's down there too. If we don't get back downstairs quickly, Ludovic's going to be thinking of grabbing Morgan any moment now. And Calcifer asked me to tell you to be quick, Charmaine put in. The castle's waiting in the royal square. I really came to tell you. But before she could finish her sentence, Twinkle had done something that made the dusty loft rotate around them, so that they were once more standing beside the open door to the roof. Beyond the door, Jamal was lying on his face along the roof ridge, shaking all over with one hand stretched out, clutching his dog's left hind leg. The dog was growling horrendously. It hated having its leg held, and it hated the roof, but it was too frightened of falling to move. But luckily, Jamal is a good dog dad. He takes care of his pupper, even when it makes poor decisions. For Squid. Sophie said, Howl, he's only got one eye, and he's not balanced at all. I know, Twinkle said. I know. He waved a hand, and Jamal came sliding backwards towards the door, towing the snarling dog. I may be dead, Jamal gasped as the two landed in a heap by Twinkle's feet. Why are we not dead? Goodness knows, Twinkle said. Excuse us. We need to see a king about a slab of gold. He went pattering away down the stairs. Sophie raced after him, and Charmaine followed, lumbering rather because of the weight of the gold brick. Down they rushed, and down again, until they swung round the corner at the top of the final flight. They arrived there just in the moment when Prince Ludovic shouldered Princess Hilda aside, barged past Sim, and pulled Morgan out of the king's arms. Bad man! Morgan boomed. He seized Prince Ludovic's beautifully curled hair and dragged. The hair came off, leaving the prince's head smooth, bald, and purple. I told you so! Sophie screamed and seemed to take wing. She and Twinkle raced down the stairs side by side. The prince looked up at them and down at Wave, who was trying to bite at his ankle and tried to drag his wig out of Morgan's hand. Morgan was beating Ludovic's face with it, still screaming, Bad man! Bad man! Bad man! The colorless gentleman called out, This way, Highness! And the two Lubbocken raced for the nearest door. Not in the library! The king and the princess shouted in one voice. They meant it so much and were so commanding that the colorless gentleman actually stopped, turned, and led the prince off in another direction. This gave Twinkle just enough time to catch up with Prince Ludovic and hang on to the prince's trailing silken sleeve. Morgan gave a yell of delight and threw the wig down on Twinkle's face, more or less blinding him. Twinkle was towed helplessly along to the next nearest door, with the colorless gentleman sprinting ahead and Wave chasing, barking up a shrimp tempest. And Sophie behind Wave shouting, Put him down or I'll kill you! Behind her, the king and the princess gave chase too. I say, this is a bit much, the king called out. The princess simply ordered them, Stop! The prince and the colorless gentleman tried to fling themselves and the children through the door and slam it in the faces of Sophie and the king. But the moment it slammed, Waif somehow burst the door open again, and the rest of them came chasing through. Charmaine was last with Sim. By this time her arms were aching. Can you hold this? She said to Sim. It's evidence. She passed Sim the gold brick while he was saying, Certainly, miss. His hands and arms went right down with the weight of it. Charmaine left him juggling with it and scuttled into what turned out to be the big room with the rocking horses lining the walls. Prince Ludovic was standing in the middle of it, looking very strange with his bald purple head. He was now holding Morgan with one arm across Morgan's neck, and Waif jumping and dancing around his feet, trying to reach Morgan. The wig was lying on the carpet like a dead animal. You'll do what I say, the prince was saying, or the child suffers. Charmaine's eye was caught by a sudden plunging blue flash from the fireplace. She looked and saw it was Calcifer, who must have come down the chimney in search of logs. He settled in among the unlit wood there with a sigh of pleasure. When he saw Charmaine looking at him, he winked one orange eye at her. He went in wearing his disguise, and let the audience know who he was through a surreptitious wink. "Suffer, as I say," Prince Ludovic said dramatically. Sophie looked at Morgan, wriggling about in the prince's arms, and then down at Twinkle, who was just standing there, staring at his fingers as if he had never seen them before. She glanced across at Calcifer and seemed to be trying not to laugh. Her voice came out wobbly as she said, "Your Highness, I warn you, you are making a big mistake." "You certainly are," the king agreed, panting and red in the face from the chase. "We in High Norland do not, as a rule, go in for treason trials, but we shall take pleasure in trying you." "How can you?" the prince demanded. "I'm not one of your subjects. I'm a Lubbocken." "Then you cannot by law be king after my father," Princess Hilda stated. Unlike the king, she was quite cool again, and very royal. "Oh, can't I?" said the prince. "My parent, the Lubbock, says I am to be king. It intends to rule the country through me. It got rid of the wizard so that nothing can stand in our way. You must crown me king at once, or this child suffers. I am keeping him as a hostage. Apart from that, what wrong have I done?" "You've taken all their money!" Charmaine called out. "I saw you, both you Lubbokins, making the kobolds carry all their tax money away to Castel Joy, and you're to let that little boy go before he strangles." Morgan's face was bright red by then, and he was struggling frantically. "I don't think Lubbocken have any real feelings," she thought. "I don't understand why Sophie thinks it's so funny." "My goodness," said the king. "So that's where it all went, Hilda? Well, there's one puzzle solved at any rate. Thank you, my dear," Prince Ludovic said disgustedly. "Why are you so pleased? Didn't you listen to me?" He turned to the colorless gentleman. "He'll be offering us all crumpets next. Get on and work your spell. Get me out of here." The colorless gentleman nodded and spread his faintly purple hands out in front of him. But that was the moment when Sim shuffled in with the gold brick in his arms. He shuffled swiftly across to the colorless gentleman and dropped the gold brick on the gentleman's toe. After that, a lot of things happened very quickly. As the gentleman, now purple with agony, hopped around yelling, Morgan seemed to arrive at his last gasp. His arms waved in a strange convulsive pattern, and Prince Ludovic found himself trying to carry a tall, full-grown man in an elegant blue satin suit. He dropped the man, who promptly turned round and hit the prince in the face. "How dare you do that?" the prince screamed. "I'm not used to it! Nobody makes me bleed my own blood! Nobody!" "Bad luck," said Wizard Howl, and hit him again. This time Prince Ludovic caught his foot in the wig and sat down with a thump. "Only language a Lubbocken understands," the wizard remarked over his shoulder at the king. "Had enough, Luddy, old boy?" At the same time, Morgan, who seemed to be wearing Twinkle's blue velvet suit, very crumpled and much too big for him, rushed at the wizard, booming, "Dad, dad, 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 dad! Ba, 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 ba!" "Oh, I see," Charmaine thought. "They changed places somehow. That's pretty good magic. I'd like to learn how you do that." She wondered, while she watched the wizard carefully keeping Morgan away from the prince, why Howl had wanted to be prettier than he was. He was most people's idea of a very handsome man. Although she thought his hair was perhaps a little unreal. It fell over his blue satin shoulders in improbably beautiful flaxen curls. But also, at the same time, Sim stood back, while the colorless gentleman hopped about in front of him, and seemed to be trying to make a formal announcement of some kind. But Morgan was raising such a clamor, and Waif was barking so hard, that all anyone could hear was, "Your Majesty and Royal Highness!" While Sim was speaking, Wizard Howl looked across at the fireplace and nodded. There was something that happened then between the wizard and Calcifer. It was not exactly a flash of light, and not exactly a flash of invisible light either. While Charmaine was still trying to describe it to herself, Prince Ludovic humped into himself and vanished downwards. So did the colorless gentleman. In their places were two rabbits. The wizard Howl looked at them and at Calcifer. "Why rabbits?" he asked, swinging Morgan up into his arms. Morgan at once stopped yelling, and there was a moment of silence. "All that hopping about," Calcifer said. "It put me in mind.
Rabbits.
The colorless gentleman was still hopping about, but he was now hopping as a large white rabbit with bulging purple eyes. Prince Ludovic, who was a pale fawn color with even bigger purple eyes, seemed too astonished to move. He twitched his ears and wobbled his nose. And this is when Waif became best friends with the bunny. Best friends. Meanwhile, the visitors Sim had been trying to announce were already in the room. Waif hugged the fawn-colored rabbit. Yes. Hugged the fawn-colored rabbit almost under the runners of the kobold's painted sled chair, which was being pushed by the Witch of Montalbino. Great Uncle William, rather pale and thin, but evidently much better, was propped on a pile of blue cushions inside the chair. He and the witch and Timmins, who was standing on the cushions, all leaned over the chair's carved blue side to watch Wave give a tiny snarl and put the rabbit in a box so that they could play again later. Good gracious, said Wizard Norland, the king, Sophie, and Charmaine. I'd have thought Waif was too small to do any of that. It's hard to hug when you have dog arms. Princess Hilda waited for the rabbit to land and sailed across the sled chair. She ignored, grandly, the frantic rushing and scrambling as Waif chased the white rabbit around the room. My dear Princess Matilda, the princess said, holding both hands out to Peter's mother. What a long time it's been since we've seen you here. I do hope you mean to make us a long visit. Well, that depends, the witch said dryly. My daughter's second cousin, said the king explained to Charmaine and Sophie, prefers to be called the Witch of Somewhere usually, always gets irritated if anyone calls her Princess Matilda. My daughter makes a point of it, of course. Hilda doesn't hold with inverted snobbery. By this time, Wizard Howl had hoisted Morgan up onto his shoulders so that they could both watch as Waif snuggled the white rabbit behind the fifth rocking horse along. And they played. 'Cause now instead of being evil, they were bunnies. Hooray! Morgan boomed, beating his fists on his father's flaxen head. Howl rather hastily hoisted Morgan down and handed him to Sophie. Have you told them about the gold yet? He asked her. Not yet. The evidence got dropped on someone's foot, Sophie said, taking firm charge of Morgan. Well, tell them now, Howl said. There's something else that's strange here. He bent down and caught Waif as she trotted back to Charmaine. Waif squirmed and whined and craned and did everything she could to make it clear that it was Charmaine she wanted to go to. Shortly, Howl said, turning Waif round in a puzzled way. Eventually, he carried her over to the sled chair, where the king was jovially shaking Wizard Norland's hand, while Sophie showed the gold ingot to them. The witch and Timmins and Princess Hilda all crowded around Sophie, staring and demanding to know where Sophie had found the gold. Charmaine stood in the middle of the room, feeling quite left out. I know I'm being unreasonable, she thought. I'm just the same as I always was, but I want Waif back. I want to take her with me when they send me back home to Mother. It was obvious to her that Peter's mother was going to look after Great Uncle William now. And where did that leave Charmaine? Then there was a terrific crash. The walls shook, causing Calcifer to shoot out of the fireplace and hover over Charmaine's head. Then, in very slow motion, a large hole opened on the wall beside the fireplace. The wallpaper peeled away at first, followed by the plaster underneath it. Then the dark stones behind the plaster crumbled away and vanished, until nothing was left but a dark space. Finally, not in slow motion at all, Peter shot backwards through the hole and landed, laying in front of Charmaine. Ho! Boomed Morgan, pointing. I think you're right, Calcifer agreed. Peter did not seem in the least bit put out. He looked up at Calcifer and said, So you're not dead, then? I knew she was making a stupid fuss. She's never sensible about things. Oh, thank you, Peter, Charmaine said. And when have you ever been sensible? Where have you been? Yes, indeed, said the Witch of Montalbino. I'd like to know that, too. She pushed the sled chair right up to Peter, so that Great Uncle William and Timmins were gazing down on Peter, along with everyone else except for Princess Hilda. Princess Hilda was looking ruefully at the hole in the wall. Peter did not seem worried at all. He sat up. "Hello, Mum," he said cheerfully. "Why aren't you and Ingrid?" "Because the wizard Howl is here," said his mother. "And you?" "I've been in the Wizard Norland's workshop," Peter said. "I went there as soon as I gave Charmaine the slip." He waved his hands in a with the rainbow of strings tied around his fingers to show how he got there. But he gave Wizard Norland a slightly anxious look. "I've been very careful in there, sir, really." "Have you indeed?" said Great Uncle William, looking at the hole in the wall. It seemed to be slowly healing up. The dark stones were closing gently in towards the middle of it, and the plaster was growing after the stones. "And what were you doing in there for a whole day and night, may I ask?" "Divining spells," Peter explained. "They take ages. It was lucky you had all of those food spells in there, sir, or I'd have been really hungry by now. And I used your camp bed. I hope you don't mind." By the look on Great Uncle William's face, it was clear that he did mind. Peter added hurriedly, "But the spells worked, sir. The royal treasure must be here, where we all are, because I told the spell to take me to wherever it was." "And so it is," said his mother. "Wizard Howl has already found it." "Oh," said Peter. He looked very cast down. But then he brightened up. "I did a spell that worked then!" Everyone looked at the slowly healing hole. The wallpaper was now moving softly across the plaster, but it was obvious that the wall would never be quite the same again. It had a soggy, wrinkled look. "I'm sure this is a great comfort to you, young man," Princess Hilda said bitterly. Peter looked at her blankly, obviously wondering who she was. His mother sighed. "Peter, this is Her Highness, Princess Hilda of High Norland. Perhaps you would be good enough to get up and bow to her and to her father, the king. They are, after all, near relations of ours." "How come?" Peter asked, but he scrambled to his feet and bowed in a very mannerly way. "My son, Peter," said the witch, "who is now most probably heir to the throne, sire." "Pleased to meet you, my boy," the king said. "This has all become very confusing. Won't somebody give me an explanation?" "I will give you one, sire," the witch said. "Perhaps we should all sit down," the princess suggested. Sim, be good enough to remove these, 2 bunnies in boxes, please." "Very good, ma'am," Sim said. He shuffled rapidly around the room, gathering up the 2 bunnies. He was clearly so anxious not to miss whatever the witch was going to say that Charmaine was sure that he simply dumped the rabbits outside the door. By the time he hurried back into the room, everyone had settled onto the grand but faded sofas, except for Great Uncle William, who lay back on his cushions looking thin and weary, and Timmins, who sat himself on a cushion beside Great Uncle William's ear. Calcifer went back to roost in the grate. Sophie took Morgan on her knee, where Morgan put his thumb in his mouth and went to sleep. And Wizard Howl at last handed Waif back to Charmaine. He did it with such a dazzlingly apologetic smile that Charmaine felt quite flustered. "I like him much better as a grown-up man," she thought. No wonder Sophie was so annoyed with Twinkle. Waif, meanwhile, squeaked and bounced and put her paws on Charmaine's dangling glasses in order to lick her chin. Charmaine rubbed Waif's ears and stroked the frayed hair on the top of Waif's head, while she listened to what Peter's mother had to say. "As you may know," the witch said, "I married my cousin Hans Nicholas, who was at that time 3rd in succession to the throne of High Norland. I was 5th, but as a woman I didn't really count, and besides, the only thing I wanted in the world was to be a professional witch. Hans was not interested in being king either. His passion was for climbing mountains and discovering caves and new passes among the glaciers. We were quite content to leave our cousin Ludovic to be heir to the throne. Neither of us liked him, and Hans always said Ludovic was the most selfish and unfeeling person he knew. But we both thought that if we went away and showed we had no interest in the throne, he wouldn't bother us. So we moved to Montalbino, where I took up office as a witch, and Hans became a mountain guide. And we were very happy until just after Peter was born, when it became dreadfully plain that our other cousins were dying like flies. And not only dying, but also said to be wicked and dying because of their wickedness. And when my cousin Isola Matilda, who was the kindest and gentlest of girls, was killed while apparently attempting to murder someone, Hans became positive that Ludovic was doing it. Systematically killing off all of the other heirs to the throne, he said, and giving us all a bad name while he does it. I became simply terrified for Hans and for Peter. By that time, Hans was next heir after Ludovic, and Peter came after that. So I got out my broomstick. Got out my boomstick! But Peter put Peter into a sling on my back and flew all the way down to Ingry to consult Mrs. Pensimon, who had trained me as a witch. I believe, the witch said, turning to Howl, that she trained you too, Wizard Howl. Howl gave her one of his scintillating smiles. That was much later. I was her very last pupil. Then you know that she was the best, said the Witch of Montalbino. You agree? Howl nodded. You could trust everything she told you, the witch went on. She was always right. Sophie nodded too at this, a little ruefully. But when I consulted her, said the witch, she was not sure that there was anything I could do except to take Peter and go very far away. Indigo, she thought. I said, but what about Hans? And she agreed that I was right to be worried. Give me half a day, she said, to find an answer for you. And she went and shut herself into her workroom. Less than half a day later, she came out almost in a panic. I'd never seen her so upset before. My dear, she said, your cousin Ludovic is a vile creature called a Lubbocken, offspring of a Lubbock that roams the hills between High Norland and Montalbino. And he is doing just what your Hans suspected he was doing, no doubt with the help of that Lubbock. You must hurry home to Montalbino at once. Let us pray you get there in time, and on no account tell anyone who this little lad of yours is. Don't tell him or anyone else, or the Lubbock will try to kill him too. Oh, is that why you never told me all this before? Peter said. You should have done. I can look after myself. That, said his mother, is exactly what poor Hans thought too. I should have made him come to Ingry with us. Don't interrupt, Peter. You nearly made me forget the last thing Mrs. Pensimon said to me, which was, there is an answer, my dear. In your native land there is, or was, something called the elf gift belonging to the royal family, which has the power to keep the king safe and the whole country with him. Go and ask the king of High Norland to lend his elf gift to Peter. It will keep him safe. So I thanked her and put Peter on my back again and flew as fast as I could to Montalbino. I meant to ask Hans to come with me to High Norland to ask for the elf gift, but when I got home they told me Hans was up there in the Getterhorns with the mountain rescue team. I had the most horrible premonition then. I flew straight on up into the mountains, with Peter still on my back. He was crying with hunger by then, but I didn't dare stop, and I just got there in time to see the Lubbocks start the avalanche that killed Hans. The witch stopped there, as if she could not bear to go on. Everyone waited respectfully while she swallowed and dabbed her eyes with a multicolored handkerchief. Then she shook her shoulders efficiently and said, I put protections around Peter at once, of course, the strongest possible. They've never been once off of him. I let him grow up as secretly as possible, and I didn't mind at all when Ludovic began telling people that I was a mad prisoner in Casteljoy. That meant no one knew about Peter, you see, and the day after the avalanche I left Peter with a neighbor and went on to High Norland. You probably remember me coming, don't you? She asked the king. Yes, I do, said the king. But you said nothing about Peter or Hans, and I had no idea it was all so sad and urgent. And of course I hadn't got the elf gift. I didn't even know what it looked like. All you did was to start me off, together with my good friend Wizard Norland here, looking for the elf gift. We've been hunting for it for some 13 years now, and we haven't got very far, have we, William? We've gotten nowhere at all, Great Uncle William agreed from the sled chair. He chuckled. But people will keep thinking that I'm the expert on the elf gift. Some folks even say that I'm the elf gift and I guard the king. I do try to guard him, of course, but not like an elf gift would. Well, that's one of the reasons I sent Peter to you, said the witch. It's always possible that the rumors were true, and I knew you could keep Peter safe anyway. I'd been looking for that elf gift myself for years because I thought it could possibly get rid of Ludovic. Beatrice of Strangia told me that the wizard Howl of Ingry was better at divination than any wizard in the world, so I went to Ingry to ask him to find it for me. It is getting very late, but I can finish 6 more pages. The wizard Howl threw his flaxen head back and began to laugh. Ha ha! And you have to admit that I did find it, he said, most unexpectedly. There it sits, on Miss Charming's lap. What, Waif? Said Charmaine. Waif wagged her tail and looked demure. Howl nodded. That's right, your little enchanting dog. He turned to the king. don't those records of yours talk about a dog anywhere? Oh, frequently, said the king. But I had no idea. My great-grandfather held a state funeral for his dog when it died, and I simply wondered what all the fuss was about. Princess Hilda coughed gently. Of course, most of our oil paintings... Most of our oil... Bleh. Of course, most of our oil paintings have been sold now, she said, but I do remember that a lot of our earlier kings were painted with a dog at their sides. They were generally a little, nobler looking than Wave, however. Well, I imagine they come in all sizes and shapes, Great Uncle William put in. It looks to me as if the elf gift is something certain dogs inherit, and the later kings forgot to breed them properly. Now, for instance, when Wave has her puppies a bit later in the year... What? Said Charmaine. Puppies? Wave wagged her tail and looked even more demure. Charmaine pushed Waif's chin up and stared accusingly into her eyes. The cook's dog? She asked. Wave blinked bashfully. Oh, Wave, Charmaine wailed. Goodness knows what they'll look like. Well, we must wait and hope, said Great Uncle William. One of those pups will have inherited the elf gift. But there is one other important aspect to this, my dear. Waif has adopted you, and this makes you High Norland's elf gift guardian. Also, since the Witch of Montalbino here tells me that the Boak of Palimpsest has adopted you too, it has, hasn't it? It did make me do spells out of it, Charmaine admitted. Well then, that settles it, Great Uncle William said, nestling contentedly back on his cushions. You come and live with me as my apprentice from now on. You need to learn how to help Waif protect the country properly. Hey, Opal? Do you want me to open the door? She's so demanding. All the time. So demanding. Yes, but... Charmaine babbled. Mother won't allow me. She says magic's not respectable. My dad won't mind, probably, she added, but my mother... Oh, I'll fix her, said Great Uncle William. If necessary, I'll set your Aunt Sempronia on her. Better still, said the king. I'll make it a royal decree. Your mother will be impressed by that. You see, we need you, my dear. Yes, but I want to help you with the books, Charmaine cried out. Princess Hilda gave another of her gentle coughs. I shall be rather busy, she said, redecorating and renovating this mansion. The gold ingot was lying on the carpet by her feet. She gave it a tender prod with one sensible shoe. Now that we are solvent again, she had said happily, I suggest that you stand in for me in the library with my father twice a week, if Wizard Norland will spare you. Oh, thank you, Charmaine said. And, added the princess, as for Peter... Oh, there's no need for you to concern yourself with Peter, the witch interrupted. I shall be staying with Peter and Charmaine to look after the house, at least, until Wizard Norland is back on his feet. Maybe I shall live here permanently. Charmaine, Peter, and Great Uncle William exchanged looks of horror. I see why she got to be so efficient, being left all alone with Peter to protect, Charmaine thought. But if she stays in that house, I'll go back and live with Mother. Nonsense, Matilda, said Princess Hilda. Peter is very much our concern now that it is clear that he is our crown prince. Peter will live here and commute to Wizard Norland for lessons in magic. You must go back to Montalbino, Matilda. They need you there. And us Cobalt will look after the house, the way we always used to, Timmins piped. Oh, good, Charmaine thought. I don't think I'm really house-trained yet, and Peter most certainly isn't. But Waif is... Bless you, Timmins, and bless you, Hilda, Great Uncle William murmured. The thought of all that efficiency in my house. I shall be fine, Mum, Peter said. You don't have to protect me anymore. If you're sure, the witch said. It seems to me... Now, said Princess Hilda, at least as efficiently as the witch, it only remains for us to say goodbye to our kind, helpful, if somewhat eccentric guests, and waved them off in their castle. "Come along, all of you." "Whoops," said Calcifer, and shot away up the chimney. Sophie stood up, dislodging Morgan's thumb from his mouth. Morgan woke, looked round, saw that his father was there, and looked around more. His face crumpled up. "Dinkle," he said. "Where'd Dinkle?" He started to cry. "Now look at what you've started," Sophie said to Howl. "I can always turn into Twinkle again," Howl suggested. "Don't you dare," Sophie said, and marched away into the damp hallway after Sin. 5 minutes later, they were all gathered on the front steps of the mansion to watch Sophie and Howl hauling the struggling, crying Morgan through the door of the castle. As the door shut on Morgan's yells of "Dinkle! Dinkle! 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 Dinkle!" Charmaine bent and murmured to wave in her arms. "You did protect the country, didn't you? And I never even noticed." By this time, half the people in High Norland were gathered in the royal square to stare at the castle. They all watched with disbelief as the castle rose slightly into the air and glided towards the road that led southward. It was hardly more than an alley, really. "It'll never fit," the people said, but the castle somehow squeezed itself narrow enough to drift away along it and out of sight. The citizens of High Norland gave it a cheer as it went. And that, O best beloved, is the end of The House of Many Ways. So, that was quite a story, and I'm very glad that you read it all by yourself. But in the meantime, it is almost 11 o'clock. It has been a very long day, and it has been a very long reading, and poor Opal is beside herself with sleepiness. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without reason, I can love you for exactly the same. So, sleep well, my dear.